Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
What Just Happened by T.P. Exlan. I'm going to preface this by saying this is 100% true. I really wish it wasn't, but as I sit here with tears rolling down my face, I realize that this actually happened, and I don't know why it chose me. Tonight, Christmas Eve, at approximately 8:15 p.m., I was attacked. I decided to have my girlfriend's family over for a small fire in the fire pit, and to just relax and have some fun. Everyone showed up around 7:50 or so I was outside getting the fire pit cleaned out and ready. I also want to add my traits. I'm 22, 5'10", 215 pounds, and I work in the oil fields. I love trucks and cars and four-wheelers and hunting. I'm not small, but not huge and out of shape. I'm pretty fast on my feet and work with my hands every day. You get it. When everyone arrived, I went inside with my pit Catahoula mix. I said my hellos, grabbed a cold beer, and engaged in conversation with my girlfriend's family. This lasted until a little after 8 when I decided to light the fire. So I walked out as usual, got the fire lit alone, and watched it smolder for a short period before returning inside. Maybe 2 minutes worth of time, but it's worth noting that I did hear coyotes in the distance while lighting the fire. At around 8:10, our dog tried to urinate on the floor, so I immediately let him out and decided to put him on his chain while I messed with the fire. The coyotes were definitely closer, so I was keeping my head on a swivel for them, but it was pitch black. Suddenly, I heard some apparent coyotes about 30 yards north of my house, on the other end of my tree row. I immediately started walking to get my dog inside, and this is when everything flipped. I heard what I can best describe as a Native American war cry, where I thought I had heard coyotes. I immediately began running for my back door when I tripped and fell, adrenaline pumping hard and tunnel vision in full effect. I clawed at the dirt and concrete to make it to my door. My instincts entirely took over every move I made. I heard something come running out of the trees towards me. I managed to rip the screen door open and make it into my house, yelling complete nonsense, grabbing my 12-gauge shotgun and loading a shell into the chamber. All this time, my girlfriend and her mom were getting the dog inside. As I rounded the corner into the back mudroom, my girlfriend's mom screamed and slammed the door. Everyone, plus my dog, was now inside at that point, and I was determined to defend my home and property against whatever was out there. I stepped out the door, followed close by my girlfriend's stepdad and uncle. I proceeded to fire a round into the trees, rack a new round, and shut the door to replay the last 25 seconds. Apparently, while my girlfriend and her mother were letting my dog inside, something human-like came running from the trees and towards the open back door. My shoulders were literally burning like a hot brand, and my once tucked-in shirt was now untucked. My knees were swollen and scraped badly, and my knuckles were bright red. My fingers felt like they were broken. Adrenaline is a hell of a thing. I decided we needed more than just myself with a firearm, so I got a second shotgun for myself, put one extra round in the first, and handed it to the stepdad. Not that it matters, but in this situation it was a Remington 870 Police 14-inch SBS with a light side saddle and a sling. Mine was a Beretta 1301 TAC with an Aimpoint T2 and a Surefire Scout light and sling. I gave the uncle a Springfield 1911 with a 10-round magazine of 230-ground Federal Hydroshock. Needless to say, we were armed fairly well. We had good illumination, and I was confident in my firearms. We stepped outside to check the trees, and there was nothing. Not a sound. Dead silent. No wind, no water flowing in the river, nothing. I checked the entire area around the house, and we all met at the trucks in the driveway to brush it off and grab a beer. I decided to grab my Glock 19X that I keep in the truck with a light on it, just so I wouldn't have to lug the heavy 12-gauge if something were to happen. When we made it back to the back door where the rest of the family was congregated, I laid my shotgun inside the house and kept the pistol. My stepdad went inside, and the uncle, mother, girlfriend, and myself stayed within 5 feet of the doorway. As we were standing there, finally breathing and calming down, it happened again. 2 human-like figures darted through the trees, not directly towards us, but still too close for comfort. Lead flew. I'm talking all 18 rounds of 9mm and all 10 of the 45 ACP. Stepdad came back out, emptied the 870. I followed that up with 9 more rounds of the 12-gauge out of the Beretta. It all happened so fast. I'm still pretty much deaf in the right ear. I've shot plenty of guns over the years, but tonight it sounded like a war, and I forgot everything that I'd learned. Proper grip and stance went out the windows, and all I was worried about was keeping my loved ones and myself alive. All this time, the fire was still blazing. I should mention that this was the first fire that I'd had out there. Well, we barricaded ourselves inside the house, attempting to call anyone we could. But it was Christmas Eve, and everyone was busy. The neighbors down the road were gone, so there was no one to reach out to. I was about to call the sheriff's department when the stepdad mentioned putting out the fire. So we did. I used a regular fire extinguisher. And magically, everything calmed down. No more mysterious figures, no more war cries or coyotes, just peace. I don't know what happened that night, but I do know that I have a C-shaped burn or rash on my right shoulder and 3 large scratches on my left. We went in town the next night to stay in a hotel, and I'm not sure if I can go back, honestly. I've never felt so in danger in my life. I've had 1,000cc super sport motorcycles. I've ridden bulls and had guns pointed at me. I've been in car wrecks and fights, you name it. Nothing topped what happened to me. I now have a genuine fear that I pray nobody else ever has to feel. I'm not really sure how to end this, so yeah. Birthday Boy by Ben Gunn. Before I get into my tale, you need some context. When I was young, my family was heavily Christian, making me spend my Sundays at service and Wednesdays at youth group. I'm not religious now, but those years instilled an awareness of the paranatural in me. As I grew up, I became more independent and rebellious, leading me to seek out forms of psychedelic spiritual enlightenment. It just so happened that I deemed that a priority over having a place to stay. As a young adult hooligan living in a small farm town in the middle of the Willamette Valley, there weren't a lot of opportunities for kids my age. You either partook in substances, worked in the wine industry, or got involved in the numerous cults around. It was about 10 p.m. as my friend and I were bumming smokes from patrons behind a local bar. There were about 5 people, my friend and I excluded. We were all a tad bit tipsy, sharing tales and shooting the crap, when a man walked out that I had never seen before. He was about 5.5 feet tall with odd proportions, donning a burly mustache that didn't fit his face. He wore a cowboy hat 2 sizes too big, a leather jacket over a plain white tank top, leather pants, and boots to finish off his outfit. He kind of just stood there, trying to be a part of the group, yet excluded through some metaphysical divide. After about 10 minutes of loitering, he started talking. He mentioned it was his birthday and referred to himself as the birthday boy. On and on he talked about how it was his birthday, that he needed a cigarette because it was his birthday, and that someone should buy him a drink for his birthday. I'm pretty sure it was his birthday. 30 minutes passed, and the patrons slowly started filtering out until it was just the birthday boy, my friend, and me. He asked us if we knew where any abandoned buildings were, and if we could take him to one. I was already unnerved, but at this point my entire being was screaming at me to get away from him. Like a switch had flipped, and I could feel some sort of evil intention radiating from him. I gave him some sort of vague direction of a non-existent building and told him goodbye. He asked me if I would take him there and celebrate his birthday with him, and that he had gifts for us. I said no, as I needed to make it to a friend's house to go to sleep. And he told me, and I quote, "I'll see you again, Noah," and gave a huge, inhuman grin. He then proceeded to sprint backwards for about 30 feet. Backwards. Then spin around and run in the direction that I gave him. And I looked at my friend, and we both started running in the opposite direction, cutting through side streets and jumping a couple of fences. We ended up making it to my friend's house and made it inside. About 20 minutes passed. We were just chilling inside and smoking, and I heard someone singing "Happy Birthday to You." I peeked out a window, and it was the fucking birthday boy. I don't know how he found us, but he paced up and down the street for an hour or two until he gave up and spirited away. I never saw the birthday boy again, but I'll never forget his parting sound. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of cowboy boots furiously smacking the pavement. I don't know what the heck he was, but he was not human. To the birthday boy, let's not celebrate together, ever. My Second Ex-Girlfriend by Floor Gangman. I want to say that I know this might not sound creepy at first, or at least not as much as the other stories that I've read. But as the person who went through it, lacking the knowledge of what she might try to do, was terrifying. This happened over the course of 11 months or so, on and off, and has to easily be the worst and longest encounter with a woman I've ever had in my life. I was on a residential UK trip, essentially a field trip for Americans. This was back in July 2022, where I spent 1 week on the trip in the woods and the second weekend back at a community center where I'm from. I was a college student at the time. UK college, not University for Americans. I was 17 when this happened. I was in a dorm with about 5 other guys, and one day my group started talking to a girl because she revealed that she went to the same college as most of us who were in the group. She liked talking to me a fair bit, and this was an early sign that she liked me. The next ones included how physically close she was to me during a silent disco, and didn't realize I was moving away from her every time, only finding out because she exclaimed afterwards, "I was trying to dance with you, but you kept moving away." This was pretty much when I put 2 and 2 together. Also, she got us to dance at a campfire while waiting for other friends to arrive. She also snuck into the dorms with us once, her request, and on reflection, this behavior was actually kind of an early creepy sign, considering the dorms were split based on sex. Anyway, the week of week 2 came, and I was texting her asking to go out, and she replied in literally less than a minute to say yes, and sent me a video of her asking to voice call immediately. I turned her down because I'm a bit socially anxious, but that was another sign of how strongly she liked me. Everything went well, but on the 3rd week of us being together, she started accusing me of ignoring a text she sent me while I was in class. This is important for later. She said my Snapchat avatar appeared as if I had read it for some reason. And it was about her having a panic attack while I was in class and needing my help. But again, I didn't see it because I was in class at the time. As soon as I got out of the class, I responded and asked if she was okay, and she asked why I didn't respond. And that's when I said, well, I was in class. She accused me of ignoring her, to which I said I didn't. She wouldn't believe me, and even got one of my other friends to text me and say to respond to her messages from now on. I told her, another friend, I was, and that was the end of it with her. But my girlfriend at the time wasn't convinced. She wouldn't let it go to the point we met in person at college one day as privately as we could. I tried explaining it again, this time being sure to add that I would have responded had I seen it, which, as I said, I did. She was calm and laughing about it a bit and ended things with, just respond next time. Given that we were only 3 weeks into the relationship at that point, and that she clearly didn't trust me, I decided that night to once more try to explain what happened. If she didn't listen, I decided I was done. To her credit, she was calm and read through all my texts about it when I explained slowly, and promised I hadn't seen her text, but still ended with the response of, I just wish you hadn't ignored my text. I broke up with her. I did it as calmly and gently as possible, explaining that I was still willing to be friends with her. I just didn't see us working out if she wouldn't believe me this early in the relationship, because I could see the lack of trust. Her first response was, "You're breaking up with me? Are you serious?" Again, taking into account she was the one who made a big deal out of nothing. This was past the time I planned to go to bed and stayed up until midnight having to respond to what she said. I don't remember everything she said, but I can remember some including, I guess I'll cry myself to sleep now, and I can't believe I'm being broken up with over a text. I have a video of her text somewhere, but I really don't want to post it for privacy. It's not something I really want to relive unnecessarily either. The next day at college, I walked in and she was sitting at the table my friends usually sat at, something she didn't normally do. As soon as I walked through the college doors and she saw me, she wouldn't break eye contact. It was creepy. I managed to sit with my friends again later that day, because frick that. But whenever she was there, she tried to argue with me, saying stuff like I'd never get a better girlfriend than her, calling me a bottom and stuff like that. I could tell she made everyone in the group uncomfortable, and apparently she even did it so much that she said this when I wasn't even with the group, enough to a point that a girl I only spoke to a few times, who was also in the residential area, decided to stand up for me. Her and her boyfriend at the time also warned me about her before I broke up with her, which is another reason why I did it. About a week later, she started going out with a guy from the group I was friends with, and to be honest, everyone could tell she was just doing it to try getting back at me, even though I could frankly care less, since I was just glad to have finally left her. I remember when he broke up with her like a fortnight later, sitting down at the table with him, and he just said, "Was blank's name as aggressive with you as when you broke up with her?" To which I said, "Yeah." He shook hands with me after revealing that she had had the exact same reaction with him, which he broke up with her as she did me. The big climax, though, was one day when we were in college and she started arguing with me when I wasn't even sitting at her table. I was with my friends. I'd never insulted her once at this point, even though she'd done so to me countless times before, and I'll admit I commented on her weight as she was storming off. However, when I did this, she swung around and punched me in the side of the head. I promptly shouted at her to fuck off. I reported everything to the college, and she was given a warning. I can guarantee that if I did that to her, I would have been gone immediately. I did, however, get to read her report about me. It was full of lies about me supposedly being a horrible boyfriend to her, and genuinely the worst handwriting I've ever seen in my life. Thankfully, the college believed me when I told them that none of that had ever happened. She looked depressed around me from that point on, and I admittedly couldn't keep the smile off my face, which just annoyed her even more. People in a few of my classes who heard about it made jokes, but were promptly shut down when I said, "I bet you wouldn't be laughing if this was the other way around." Later, I found out that she was also trying to start trouble with other people from my friend group, and was promptly kicked out for it. On top of all this, in June this year, I found out that she had slept with a guy at the college who was known for being an extremist during the first week that we were together. As for me, I'm doing fine. I'm in university now doing film and have a great group of friends, still keep in contact with those from my old group, and have a new girlfriend as of July. Much happier together than in that previous relationship. I will add, though, that one funny thing that happened once was when she looked at my Instagram story, even though she didn't follow me, with a picture of me wearing my current girlfriend's ring, saying how happy we were together. It's not the only time she's looked at my story, even though she doesn't follow me on Instagram, which in and of itself is a little creepy. Well, like I said, I moved on, and I'm in a much better place now. Heard My Neighbors Scream by Visual Platform. I don't exactly remember when this happened, but my guess is like October or November of 2023. It was about 12 in the morning, and I was on my Xbox with my friends, and we were just chatting it up. I had my window open because my heater was on, and I was sweating. And I only have one window, and I play right next to it. So I was sitting there when I heard a woman scream or yell. I was so caught off guard, I was just kind of confused. I live in a nice neighborhood, so I wasn't necessarily scared. And fast forward a few minutes, and I heard it again. So obviously I paid more attention. I thought I heard it coming from the house across the street, and that was the last time I heard it that night, so I just went to bed and mostly forgot about it. About a month later, I was in my front living room, and I could see a one-story directly in front of me, one to the left as well. Then I saw a cop car outside the one-story on the left where I had heard that scream. I've lived in our house my whole life, and I've never seen a cop car at anyone's house on our street. The people who lived in the houses were a young couple, and they just recently had a kid. The husband did manual labor of some sort, and the mom was a stay-at-home mom. The wife's parents actually lived in the house across from them, the one next to my window. I knew these people very well. I mean, they were great people. Anyway, I saw the cops walk up and knock on the door. I do love drama, so I kept watching. I saw them talk to her, and then they had a sheet with them. And then they talked and did some cop stuff. They finally left, and a couple of days later I saw a moving truck, and most of the stuff in their garage was being moved. I thought this was odd, so I used the Freedom of Information Act and found the police report. Turns out what they had was a restraining order that the wife had put on the husband. It stated that he was struggling with substance abuse and had been physically abusing her. I was shocked because I'd never seen anything odd from them. But then I remembered the screaming coming from their house, and I had an epiphany. I was like, oh shit, that was her being abused and yelling. It all clicked. It was sad to see because they were so young and had a kid. The kid was so cute and had this big blonde head of curly hair. I know this isn't totally scary or paranormal or involving a spirit, but it was very disturbing when I put it all together. The woman's doing better now, thank God. But man, domestic violence is so horrible. Uncle Josh note here. Yeah, man, there's a lot of stuff that goes on right under our noses that we never really even know about. I mean, this truly is a guy next door story. You never know what's going on just a few feet away from your house. The Man Came Back by E6B. Just to make things clear off the bat, this story is actually my girlfriend's, but I have some experience with it too. My girlfriend has a very dark history. When she was a baby, her mother had multiple affairs behind her father's back. At some point, she wanted the guys she was messing around with to beat up her father to get the message that she was over him. So 2 guys ended up shooting him in the head 4 times and cutting his throat twice. My girlfriend's mother was sentenced to life in prison, and her aunt had gotten custody of her. But from what my girlfriend told me, she was physically abusive as well. And when she was 17 years old, my girlfriend had gotten kicked out of the house right before she graduated from high school. She ended up moving in with one of her best friends, but due to all of this, she's not involved in religious activities at all. In her way of thinking, if there's a God, why would he have let all of that happen to her? My girlfriend and I are both 21 years old. We've been dating for just under a year and a half. I met her on a personal vacation at my parents' house in New York. Well, I live in North Carolina, as I'm stationed here. We've been dating for long distance until recently, roughly 3 weeks ago. She moved in with me in our first apartment here in North Carolina. My girlfriend has a gift. She used to be able to see people and hear people who passed on. And that was more when she was younger, roughly between 8 and 16 years old. And after 16, she stopped seeing and hearing them altogether. That is, until about 6 months ago when she came for my grandfather's funeral. She was standing outside a room as we were all saying our last goodbyes after he passed away from cancer. I was so upset that he never got to meet her, but when I went to see her in the hall, she told me that he had come to her and finally met her before passing on. But there's no gift like this that doesn't have a dark side. She then told me about someone she calls the Man, a very skinny and pale man with pitch black eyes. She says that she can feel his presence whenever he's near. It's very oppressing, and she told me about how when she was younger, he would sometimes be in a corner of her room at night looking at her. Then she talked about how a couple of times he actually had gotten on top of her and pinned her to her bed. But other than that, he had never harmed her. She told me that she'd heard him mumble or whisper, but could never make out what he was saying. And all of this occurred when she lived with her aunt, and then stopped when she moved out. She was convinced that this malevolent spirit was tied to that house, as it would have followed her. And after she left, it was a huge relief for her, as it felt like this thing was just feeding off her fears. But fast forward to her moving in with me 4 years later. We had just gotten finished settling into our cozy 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. It was relatively new and built around 2013. We didn't have a worry in the world. But then she told me about how right before the move, she started seeing shadow people. Not harmful or anything, but just shadow people out of the corner of her eyes. And they were always minding their own business. But she also felt like she was being watched. But then it continued when she came down to North Carolina. She would see them in the corners or at quick glances, but nothing that would really obstruct her day. I never saw anything like that in our new place, but I did occasionally hear footsteps in the night. I just waved it off as our neighbors. One night, about a week into us living there, it was around 12:15 in the morning. We were laying in bed with the lamp on. We were on our cell phones checking Facebook and things like that. And we decided to go to sleep, so I turned the light off and closed my eyes. That's when I heard her start to cry, while trying to keep herself sound quiet. I rolled over to my girlfriend and asked her what was wrong, but she just tucked her face into my neck and cried and whispered, "The man is back. He's here." I asked where was he, and she replied with, "On the ceiling." I looked up at our ceiling fan and didn't really notice anything, but then I saw a black mass kind of shaped like a bent oval. I looked around the rest of the room, and there was no light source that could have cast a shadow like this. And then I noticed that the shape was getting darker. I quickly turned the lights on and held on to her for a little while, and then I went to my closet and dug out my Bible. She said she felt the presence leave at that point, but asked to read some of it aloud and maybe comfort her. As I was reading, maybe a page worth in, she stopped me. She told me that the more that I read, the more she was feeling sick to her stomach. And then I heard footsteps in our living room, walking around. I heard them walk up to our bedroom door, but that was the last time I heard them. This whole ordeal lasted maybe 10 minutes. Since that night, we haven't experienced anything except for the occasional shadow person minding their own business. I check every part of the room when I go to sleep at night, and I keep our Bible out on the nightstand. I don't know if that was a malevolent spirit that we saw, or a demon masquerading as a pale, skinny man, or whatever. I would like some answers. I suggested maybe we should go to church to my girlfriend, but she's iffy on the idea. We want to burn some sage, but have yet to find a local shop that sells it. So I leave it here with you, the listener. Any suggestions that you might have of what we should do would be greatly appreciated. My First Rescue by Alice. I just turned 37. This story took place when I was 11, and all names have been changed to protect the camp. I grew up in a very wealthy family in a very rich area. The camp I went to was both a day and overnight camp. To say my parents were overprotective would be an understatement. The camp I went to treated us like babies. The camp was fun, but oppressive. For example, even the high schoolers had to be accompanied to the bathroom. Then, in second grade, my mom checked the wrong box and accidentally signed me up for a week of circus camp. My life was never the same again. Circus camp didn't treat us like babies. We didn't have to ask to use the bathroom. We could go around campus as we needed to, and we didn't need staff up our ass every second of the day. Instead, they trusted us, maybe a little too much, but they treated us as competent people. But we also had all sorts of responsibility for making camp work. We got called when the Cisco truck broke. We got called to evacuate the kiddie camp when the sewer pipe exploded. It was our job to get everyone in camp to shelter when storms hit. We joined the staff in making camp safe after storms, and we would direct traffic. Basically, we got thrown at every major problem at camp, and it didn't matter that we were mostly girls. We took the problems head on, and we were proud of that. No one else would have let us near those problems, let alone have us be key parts in handling them. And somehow, because we were circus campers, this was all perfectly okay and the expected norm. Same kids, same summer, but in a different camp for the week. We were back to being treated like babies, but at circus camp, we were the shit. We were allowed to do so much more at circus camp than we could anywhere else. The circus camp leotard had real power at camp. I remember when I was 10, I was heading to the bathroom when I ran across a junior camp, middle schooler staff, telling a group of girls they had to wait to use the bathroom because they only had one staff at the moment, and he couldn't supervise the girls' bathroom. The 13-year-olds were not allowed to use the bathroom unsupervised, but a 10-year-old circus camper supervising them somehow made it okay. the whole thing was kind of fucked up. And that's before you got to us walking on wires, jumping off third-story buildings into airbags, and playing 25 feet in the air on a length of fabric. But the scariest thing that ever happened to me at camp took place when I was 11 years old. I wasn't in the group of oldest circus campers, those were the 12 and 13-year-olds, but I was in the second tier. We had a special aerial dance camp running on campus, and the circus camp director, Stephen, encouraged our oldest kids to take it because the instructor was amazing. That left us 11-year-olds as the oldest circus campers that week, and you better believe we stepped up, determined to prove ourselves just as tough as the older kids. Being tough was part of every circus camper's identity. On the second day of camp that week, the overall camp director, Thomas, came to us because a 4-year-old kitty camper, Nancy, was missing. Stephen called us all over and told us what was going on, and I remember him saying, "She's missing, she needs help, and we are it. I want Nancy found, and I want her found now." I remember the major impact that statement had on me. Stephen then split us into 2 groups. The run group was made up of 8 kids, 4 of our youngest kids who personally knew Nancy, and 4 of our oldest kids, myself, an 11-year-old female, Rachel, 10-year-old female, Jazz, 10-year-old female, and Tina, a 10-year-old female. Then everyone else was in the group that would take over the grid search. 18 camp staff were already on the grid searching for this girl, and now 54 circus campers and 6 coaches joined in. While the bulk of circus campers got sent to East Campus to search for her last known location, our run team was tasked with looking in places Nancy liked to hide, and that meant Kitty Trail and the playhouses on West Campus. Kitty Trail was basically a clearing off Houghton's Trail, not far from the sports fields and not far from where Houghton's Trail met with Green Trail, the primary trailhead to the public lands. Kitty Trail had a mini trail around the clearing and like a million little tyke playhouses and ride-on toys that seemed to multiply every year. We found Nancy on Houghton's Trail, not far from Kitty Trail. She was struggling with 2 adult men that I had never seen as they were taking her down Houghton's Trail. This part of Houghton's Trail was only 2 miles from the public parking lot. We called it in on the radio, and Stephen said that if they got the kitty camper to the car, she was as good as dead. His voice had a tone I had never heard before, but now as an adult I can tell you it was fear, almost terror in that voice. Then he told us to use rocks, sticks, anything we could to slow those guys down, but to not let them out of our sight, and if they got into a car, get the plate and description. I remember thinking that if Stephen, of all people, was telling us to fight, that was about as serious as it would get. As an adult, I can't imagine the position he was in at that moment, asking such young kids to do what I wouldn't ask most adults to do today. And on the flip side, I understand better than most that if he didn't throw this at us, this story would have most likely ended up with a raped and dead Nancy. I radioed back that we would cut them off at the bridge over the river, and they were not getting past us. I was so cocky at that age, but my camp name was Hot Dog for a reason. The next radio call was Stephen on the all-camp channel, telling the whole camp that the missing girl was actually a kidnapping, that several circus campers were engaging and asking for any available staff to assist. One of the other camps called back that all available staff was on the other side of the campus, so we were out of luck. Stephen then said that the 4th and 5th graders were in a fight for the life for this kitty camper and that he needed muscle in the fight. He called for any current or former circus camper in any camp or near West Campus to get to Houghton's Trail and get in on the fight. As an adult, I can tell you that that call was a move of absolute desperation on my coach's part. But sometimes desperate moves pay off. Lucy and Cameron, 2 of our 13-year-olds who were in aerial dance camp this week, called that they were 8 minutes out. Lots of others called from South and East Campus, but it would be almost half an hour for them to arrive because of how far away they were. I remember thinking that the four of us could last 8 minutes and that Lucy and Cameron could then keep them there until our coaches arrived. Again, as an adult, I can tell you that 8 minutes is an eternity in a fight, and my plan was outright stupid. We went with it anyway. We sent the little kids running back, took the shortcut down the switchback, and beat the two assholes to the bridge. We had rocks and sticks pre-positioned, and we attacked with everything we had. As the oldest, I led the charge, and in return, I got the worst of the beating. Every time I got knocked down, I got right back up and kept fighting. I took a big chunk out of one guy's arm with my teeth, and I still remember the taste of his blood in my mouth. Jazz used a small log like a baseball bat and kept going after the asshole's knees, and I think her in and out attacks did the most damage, but the other two were no less in the fight. But the next thing I knew, the first guy was on top of me, choking me and beating my face, and telling me that he was now going to kill me. I saw dust coming up off the trail behind him, and I just started laughing. As the asshole stood up, I told him that he had better kill me quickly, because he could barely beat us 10 and 11-year-olds, and now some of the toughest kids were almost there. And God help him when our coaches arrived. But I was wrong. It was Lucy and Cameron I first saw all right. But then came running right behind them was my 15-year-old big brother Derek and 12 of his high school friends, 2 of whom were former circus campers. All of those guys much bigger than us and all ready to fight. The 2 assholes ran when they saw all of them running right at us, but we kept Nancy. It was about 20 minutes before the coaches finally arrived, and the campus was over 600 acres, not counting the huge public lands adjacent to it. Stephen took us all to the hospital to be checked out, and everyone else had only a few bruises, but my face was a little bit more than just swollen. I had to have my nose reset, and my skull had been fractured, and I tore a few things in my leg. But all in all, not too bad for an 11-year-old girl fighting 2 grown adult men. I missed a few days of circus camp in a hospital bed, but I insisted on going in for the Friday show. I'm still a bit bitter that my coaches wouldn't let me do my wire walking act because my eye was swollen shut. But we did get awards for bravery from circus, the overall camp, and even one from the sheriff. And apparently, Nancy wasn't the first young girl to go missing in the area. My mom, she didn't want to let me go back to circus camp. My grandfather, who was an Air Force PJ when he was young, insisted my mom let me go back, and even paid for circus camp when she wouldn't. The next spring, I was invited to pre-camp maintenance, where we spent 2 weekends fencing off the public trails from camp trails, adding locking gates and whatnot. After that, I spent 8 weeks in that camp every summer until I aged out. But then I returned as a CIT, a junior coach, and during college, I was a coach. I work as an officer on a search and rescue team now. Many of the crisis skills I learned in circus camp are key to what I do today, and yes, I say the line, needs help, we are it, way too often, to the point my team makes fun of me for it. A couple of side notes. Derek talked about him, James, and Caitlin getting the radio call telling them that I was in the fight, and how he ultimately told the lacrosse coaches that he had a sister in this fight and that they could go fuck themselves if they tried to stop him. We didn't have the best relationship before that, but after, we did. Another thing, how fucked up is it that it was perfectly okay in basically everyone but my mother's eye for a 10, 11, and 13-year-old circus campers to face off with 2 adult kidnappers? Again, circus campers can handle it was a mantra, but my brother and the other high school kids got in a world of trouble for backing us up and joining the fight. And how fucked up is it that the lacrosse coaches, professional athletes no less, not only didn't join those kids in coming to our aid, they tried to stop them. And how fucked up is it that 3 other high school sports camps were running on the West Fields? Some 40 high school-age kids were less than 5 or 6 minutes from us, and only the lacrosse camp guys came, and only because of my brother and the 2 former circus campers. And how fucked up is it that we had over 650 kids at camp, and only circus camp joined the search to begin with? Oh well. I will say, I'm glad I went to circus camp. Almost kidnapped from my school by glittering cable. This still freaks me out to think about. This happened when I was in elementary school. The school I went to was very strict and had a very particular set of rules. One of which was that no child was allowed to leave the school on their own and absolutely had to be picked up by a parent. The school provided each parent with a laminated card that had their child's full name and grade on it. The school was heavily gated, so someone would stand at the entrance and let parents in as long as they showed him one of those cards. Once inside the school, the parent would find their child sitting on the grass with everyone else and be able to leave with them through a different entryway, with another person making sure they had both the card and the child. On this particular day, my mom was taking a bit longer than usual to pick me up, but I didn't think anything of it and just sat on the grass talking to some friends until she got there. All of a sudden, I noticed a woman I had never seen before sort of waving in my direction, trying to get my attention. At first I thought she was talking to someone else, until I realized there was nobody else that close to me. I pointed at myself in confusion, and she nodded. I didn't get up, but instead she came up to me and said something along the lines of, "Hi, sweetie, I'm your mom's friend and she asked me to come pick you up today." Being as I'd never seen this woman in my entire life, I was immediately skeptical. I asked her, "Where's my card?" And as soon as I had said that, her smile dropped. She looked around and then walked away extremely fast. The gates around the school were very wide, so I could see out into the street super easy, and I watched as this woman sped walked to the back of the school, which was not as heavily guarded as the front, and eventually I caught sight of her getting into an old beat-up van with an older man. She didn't have any kids with her, and I have no idea how she managed to get in without someone checking on her. My mom picked me up about 3 minutes after this happened, and when I told her, she immediately met with the principal, and the next week I noticed the back part of the school being just as guarded as the front, where most of the parents picked up the kids. I know exactly what that woman's intentions were, and think back to this every now and then. I truly hope she's remained unsuccessful in any other attempts she may have made to lure children her way. So, to the woman who attempted to take me from my elementary school, and that man waiting for her in that old beat-up van, let's not meet. Mom Had a Stalker by Despondent in New York. Almost all of this I was unaware of at the time and only found out at the context of my memories years later from my parents. In about 1986, I was 5. My dad's job moved us from Brooklyn to a bit upstate, and we bought a house in Connecticut. It was quite a change in lifestyle, from a crazy, crowded neighborhood to 3 or 4 acres on a windy road in the woods. My mom especially loved the scenery and the quiet, and it should be pointed out that my mom was about 27 or so at the time. My dad was about 30. All was fine for a while until my mom grew increasingly uneasy about a man that she'd said she was seeing everywhere she went. When she went to the supermarket, he was there and would smile at her. She took my sister and I to the park one day, and there he was sitting on a bench staring at her. There were many, many more instances, and at some point my mom mentioned it to my dad, who I think kind of wrote it off at the time. He'd never seen the guy and figured it was just a coincidence. The town we lived in wasn't terribly big. You were bound to run into people over and over, but my mom was adamant, and it began to get more frequent over the course of about a month or so. I can almost recall her always being on edge when we went places. And finally, after one such incident, she called my dad at work crying and said that she was sure that this guy was watching her daily movements. She said she had left to pick up my sister from nursery school when she noticed a car through the trees on the road about 50 yards up from our driveway. When she got in her car, the other car pulled out and began to follow her. With increasing worry, she drove to get my sister and went to the school. When she came out, she saw the guy who said he appeared to be her age with sunglasses standing by his car looking at her. She'd had enough at that point, and her Brooklyn kicked in. She started yelling all manner of shit at the guy, who promptly jumped in his car and sped off. And that was enough for my dad at that point, who came home from work and promptly called the police. I remember they came to the house and spoke to my parents in the other room. And as luck would have it, the police knew exactly who the guy was, as he'd been on their radar for a similar incident a few years before with another woman. However, they described him as sort of simple-minded and harmless, and he had never threatened anyone or done anything violent. He was just a bit of a weirdo who couldn't take a hint. In what was a stunning display of small-town police ineptitude and sort of stupidity on the part of my father to allow it, the cops said they would speak to the guy and his parents, whom he lived with, and basically tell him to knock it off, again. And so they did. And that very night, my parents received a phone call from this guy's parents, who apologized profusely and explained that their son was a little socially off and never meant to hurt or scare anyone. They basically said that they told him to leave my mom alone or they would get the police involved themselves. And in true, naive, small-town fashion, everyone just sort of shook hands and let it go. For a year, maybe more, there were no more sightings of the guy. No incidents. My dad knew where he lived now, and occasionally would pass by to see if his car was at his house. I suppose it seemed that the gentle admonishment worked. However, that all changed one summer night in 1987. And this part I remember well. It was about 9 p.m. and I was in bed, not yet asleep. I could hear my parents watching TV in the living room, and at some point I heard my sister leave her room and walk down the hall towards the den. Suddenly, there was a commotion and an air of panic. It appeared that my sister was having an asthma attack and was really struggling to breathe. This would be the first of many attacks that had her on an inhaler into adulthood. My dad was running one way, my mom another, and I heard the shower come on in an attempt to see if the steam would open up my sister's airways. I remember my mom starting to shout that it wasn't working and to call 911. At that point, I got up and stood in the hallway watching everything unfold. I remember my dad yelling that he had called 911 and that they were on the way. My mom was still in the bathroom trying to get my sister to breathe steam, and I'll never forget what happened next. I walked down the hallway towards the den and the staircase that led to the front door. It was a split-level ranch-type house built into the side of a hill, so you had to walk down a flight to get to the front door. I think I was hoping to find my dad, who was probably in the kitchen where the phone was, as I was starting to panic a bit over this situation. However, he ran past me towards the bathroom where my mom and sister were. Suddenly, at the bottom of the steps, stood a young man staring up at me, the front door open wide behind him. I yelled to my parents that the police were there, and I heard footsteps come running down the hallway towards me. It had only been maybe a minute since my dad said he'd called 911. I can recall thinking that even at 6 years old or so, I was like, wow, they got here fast. my mom came up behind me and proceeded to let out the most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard. It was that fucking stalker guy standing there looking up at us. I hadn't recognized him, so I was now thoroughly confused as to what was going on. My dad was about 3 seconds behind that scream, and when he got there, my mom yelled, "It's him! It's the fucking guy!" I will never forget the look of utter confusion on my dad's face as he had a daughter in the bathroom starving for air, and his wife now in hysterics over a guy standing in the doorway. Like, which fucking thing do you attend to first? Well, the dude took one look at my dad and bolted out the door and into the dark. Dad started to follow, but quickly realized that he knew where the guy lived, and since it appeared that he had run off there was no immediate threat. He yelled at my mom to go into the kitchen, and she grabbed me in a state of blind panic and pulled me along with her. About 2 minutes later, the cops arrived, and one of them was a guy present a year earlier after the initial encounters. My mom started screaming, "He's out there! He's watching us!" The cops were completely confused. This was supposed to be a medical emergency, but suddenly it was a home invasion. EMTs were quickly behind the cops and gave my sister a few shots of an inhaler, and she was breathing again. But now all attention was on the stalker, as it was clear that he had to have been spying on my parents through a window, and in his twisted mind thought he could save the day. The cops caught up with him running down the road and arrested him. He admitted under questioning that he had been going for drives at night for months now and watching my mom through the windows from the woods. He didn't really seem to understand what the big deal was. Long story, way too long. The guy pleaded guilty to trespassing and some sort of stalking-related crime and went to jail, though I'm not sure for how long. I have often thought about going back up there to take a look at what records are available on the case, but nothing seems to exist online. According to my parents, the lack of any threats or actual violence sort of rendered this story not newsworthy. My mom was so freaked out that my dad put in for a transfer, and we were back in Brooklyn by the fall. Although it's taken over 35 years, my mom can now tell the story with a laugh. But I don't think she ever got over that night. We found out from old neighbors years later that in the late 90s, the guy had been in a group home post-jail and died from a heart attack. That's my story. Pretty scary and all true. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, please send it to UncleJoshTrueScaryStories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, please give a thumbs up to this video, but only if you liked it. And if you have a minute, leave a comment down below. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. Consider subscribing to the channel, and of course if you'd like to support the channel even further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, or consider purchasing some Uncle Josh or Campfire Crew merchandise. There is a link to my TeePublic storefront down there as well. You can find me on social media as well. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.